The Westbrook story, I was surprised that Whittingham has felt worse about everything happening with Westbrook than even I do. And all of you are laughing at me and saying, well, he makes so many millions of dollars. And one of the things we were talking about earlier this week when I was asking you how you think that guy abides disrespect or failure or how prideful he is, do you have any earthly idea how hard it is to be dominant at his size in that league? Like, to be that dominant at his size, he's got no self-awareness about his game deteriorating, correct, Chris? He can't. Self-awareness about thinking his game stinks doesn't serve him. It's not a weapon. It's never aided him.
Yeah, the hardest thing for any player, and largely that size, but any player in general, is to accept when their athleticism is waning and their skills are declining. We saw it quite visibly with Allen Iverson towards the end of his career, where he bounced around from Memphis to Detroit to Memphis, back to Philadelphia. Allen Iverson very easily could have tacked on 3, 4, 5 years of his career if he accepted the decline of his skills and accepted that he was a lesser player. I mean, Jamal Crawford is a good example of someone that did that. He was never on the skill level of an Allen Iverson or a Russell Westbrook, but he realized at a certain point he was no longer a starter, and he became one of the best sixth men of his generation by accepting a lesser role. You can see Westbrook sliding right down that Iversonian path where he's not going to accept anything short of the role he has had throughout the entirety of his career, and he's never going to accept that he's not the player he was in Oklahoma City when he won an MVP. And it's kind of startling, Dan, because you can present Westbrook with all this evidence. You can say to Russ, look, you went to Houston, it didn't work. You went to Washington, it didn't work. Last season in LA, it didn't work. You can show him that there's plenty of reasons why he should change, but he just won't do it. And as long as he's being this obstinate, there's a pretty good chance we're looking at the last season of Russell Westbrook's career.
The last season of his career? You don't think any other team would want him in there? For me, the only reason why I feel bad is
Name them. Tell me which team would want him.
Sacramento.
I just read the trade that I loved because it made me learn that Rudy Gay was still in the league. I had no idea. The report,
he is?
The report that I read was, you want to take a guess at where he is?
Oh, my God. The T-Wolves.
It was Bogdanovich, Mike Conley, and Rudy Gay for Westbrook because the Jazz are tanking and they think
He's in Utah?
They're too good. They're too good. Rudy Gay, put it on the poll, please, Guillermo, at Le Batard Show. Did you know that Rudy Gay was in Utah? And did you know that Rudy Gay was still playing? But you don't think even Utah would be in play?
It's not, Dan, it's not a question of who would acquire Westbrook. Whoever acquires Westbrook in a trade, whether it's Utah, Indiana, Charlotte has been mentioned as a possibility because of Gordon Hayward and his contract, they're not keeping him. Like if Utah acquired Russell Westbrook tomorrow, they would waive him or send him home or do whatever. He would never play a game for the Utah Jazz. He would never play a game for the Indiana Pacers. They're not acquiring Russell Westbrook, the player. They're acquiring the multiple draft picks that will come with him and the contract that will come off the books next season. So to me, and I've asked this question to dozens of people across the league in the last month or so, if Russell Westbrook doesn't play for the Lakers this season, he's not going to play anywhere.
But, Chris, for this player in particular, or these types of players, he's a former MVP. He's not Brook Lopez, who did things to change his game to extend his career in a new NBA. Like, it's hard. I'm trying to think of an MVP that was willing to change his game at the end of his career to tack on years to his career. It's not normal. I kind of understand why Russ wouldn't want to do that, you know?
Well, I mean, you can understand why it's hard to do that. And I forget, did Duncan win an MVP? I don't know if Duncan ever won an MVP. I forget, top of my head. But he evolved late in his career. I mean, he became more of a defensive specialist, and that helped, carry him a few more years on the back end. Helped the Spurs, frankly, win a championship against Miami that season when it was a Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili kind of led team with Duncan in a supporting role. Look, I understand the challenge that goes with it, but Russell Westbrook right now through 3 games is shooting 0.083% from three-point range. He has made 4 of his 17 jump shots this year. His decision-making has been awful through the entirety of this early part of the season. Like, if he doesn't change, that's it. There's nobody out there that's going to even give him a minimum level contract.
I want to ask the room this question. Mannix may know the answer, but I want to test the room. Who do you believe in the NBA is the worst at selling season tickets right now? The team that's got the worst sales ability based on its product in the entire league to get loyalty from its fan base?
I was going to say the Magic or the Jazz, but Woody gave me a look, and I can't decide if the look was an encouraging look or a discouraging look.
Stugotz, who would you guess?
I would say Sacramento.
Would you believe, do you know, Mannix, the answer to this? Because I found it shocking how poorly this has gone, that the Nets, when they signed up for the idea of we're going to get these superstars and they're going to help our business, and I knew Brooklyn didn't care the way they care about New York cares about the Knicks, but that can't go worse than that.
It's bad. It's not that surprising to me, though, because, to sell tickets, it's not about signing a bunch of marquee guys and giving some rich people a reason to buy them. The key to selling tickets is building a fan base over generations. That's why I say the Rams in LA are having the same kind of problems, selling tickets at the level of some other teams like the Cowboys or whatever other football teams are out there. Sacramento doesn't really have much of a problem selling tickets. Utah doesn't really have much of a problem selling tickets because they are entrenched franchises with, fan bases that have worshiped them for decades now. The Nets don't have that. They've only been in Brooklyn for 10 years right now. And until those 5 or 6 year olds that grew up being Nets fans because they're from Brooklyn and that's the team they watch, until they're at the season ticket buying age and their kids are at season ticket buying ages, the Nets are always going to have problems selling tickets.
Fair enough, Chris, but you understand how ridiculous it is for any team in that sport throughout history to have 3 superstars and be last in the league in season tickets sold. Like, that's absurd. That you have really contaminated your product, which you gave your franchise over to those guys because you expected them to bring not last place in season tickets.
Yeah, they shouldn't be last. Like, Orlando should probably be last if you're going to base it on merit. But it doesn't surprise me that the Nets would be in the bottom third, and no matter who's on the roster, they're going to be in the bottom third in ticket sales for the next 5 or 6 years.
How often does the Anfernee Simons thing work where a high school kid, all of a sudden it seems like Portland might be good, and it's not because of Dame Lillard, it's because they got him a better McCollum. They got him a better second piece, and they groomed him. Stugotz, this guy, it's not just that he made 9 threes last year, it's that he's a high school kid. They got it right late in the first round, and I'm not sure how good this kid can be. Like, what's his ceiling? Because I don't think he's done growing as a basketball player.
No, he's not done growing as a basketball player. And the biggest maturation of Anfernee Simons has been physically. I mean, he came out of effectively high school. He spent 1 year at that IMG Academy after high school, working out before he was eligible for the draft. But I remember covering him in the early days at Portland. He looked like a high schooler. His body was not NBA ready. And that Portland staff has spent the last couple of years building him up physically to this level. Now, last year, he made a jump last year. His numbers were great in the second half of the season, but I was skeptical coming into this year because it seemed like last year the Blazers who were just in a tough situation, were determined to get some kind of positivity by having Anfernee Simons win Most Improved Player. But I never bought it because Lillard was out. McCollum was gone. He was just a guy putting up numbers on a bad team. This year, we're seeing that's not the case. The Blazers are a good team. They are healthy. They have Lillard back. They have Jeremy Grant in the mix. Yusuf Nurkic is back in the middle. And Simons is still putting up those kind of numbers. So he is, at this point, looking like a better version of CJ McCollum. The question is for Portland, is that enough? Like with CJ McCollum, they topped out at a Western Conference Finals one year and routinely getting bounced out of the first round of the playoffs. Is Simons that much better? And is the Blazers roster overall that much better that this isn't just some kind of happy, good start?
Are the Jazz and the Spurs playing too well?
No. I mean, somebody reminded me, what was the year that the Sixers finished 19-63 or whatever it was? Like they started 3-0 too. Like it'll all come back to the level it's supposed to be at. The Jazz are just, I mean, they're just bad. Like they've got some good players. Colin Sexton is good. Jordan Clarkson is good. But you look up and down that roster, you're not going to beat a lot of teams with that group. Same thing with San Antonio. We can all get excited about Devin Vassell right now and the way he's playing, the number he's putting up. But at the end of the day, those two teams are going to have two of the worst three records in the NBA. And I'd be shocked if anything changed that.
Are you with Woj that Wembanyama is the single best prospect in the league's history, better than even LeBron?
I mean, LeBron is special. So he's the only one that could be a peer. But outside of that, yeah. I mean, I watched him those two games in Las Vegas. I talked to half a dozen scouts that were and executives who were out there watching. And I mean, they were quite literally in some ways drooling over this guy. I mean, he just does things that we've never seen before. LeBron, we've never seen someone so physically gifted at an early age like LeBron was. But when LeBron came into the NBA, he was not a jump shooter. He was not a back-to-the-basket player. He became those things probably in Miami when Eric Spoelstra kind of started to mold him as a talent. But he was never the complete player. You look at Wembanyama and you look at the way he's played in those two games in Vegas and how he's played subsequently in the French League. He looks like the complete package. We've never seen a player 7'4" shoot three-pointers like he can. We've never seen a player with the kind of physical tools overall that he has. So it does feel hyperbolic and prisoner of the moment-y to say he's the best prospect we've ever seen. But in LeBron, you saw some weaknesses, or at least not perfections in his game. In Wembanyama, you really don't see many, if any at all.
Chris, what'd you make of we were discussing this yesterday, what'd you make of the chippiness in the Suns-Warriors game?
I mean, like, the Suns have spent the last couple of weeks being called like every name in the book, like they were soft. You know, people recalling the Mavericks series and everything that went wrong in Game 7. The focus has been on DeAndre Ayton and how he gets along. They've been kind of overlooked, basically, since the season started as a, quote, real contender in the Western Conference. And I think that kind of bled out in that game. The Warriors have been going through their stuff as well, frustrations, not just with Draymond Green, but, you know, Klay Thompson, he's not the Klay Thompson he was before this recent string of injuries. He's not as elusive off the dribble. He's not as good defensively. So I think that was more a combination of some frustration from both sides kind of bleeding out onto the floor.
Can you tell us what you make of Karl Anthony Towns saying in a press conference that Anthony Edwards needs to stop eating Popeyes, needs to stop eating crappy food, and that it's on Karl Anthony Towns to correct that?
That didn't make a whole lot of sense for a couple of reasons. One, you don't really put your teammate on blast like that 3 games into the season. That felt a little over the top. Maybe it was Karl Towns, trying to flex his leadership muscles in that instance. But it was also my understanding, that Edwards changed his diet weeks and weeks ago, that he wasn't doing that anymore. The Popeyes stuff, came from last season, and the eating habits came from last season. I thought that was kind of a weird flex by Karl Towns, an unnecessary one. Anthony Edwards, while his conditioning does need to get better, is not the problem right now. The problem is this Timberwolves team has a very different roster that has a very different makeup to it. It's trying to weave Rudy Gobert into this group, and it hasn't been as successful as it's liked. I mean, that felt like an unnecessary an unnecessary kind of grenade to throw into the locker room if you're Karl Towns this early in the season.
You talk to a lot of people in the NBA. Have you found a single one that agrees with the Timberwolves and what they gave up for Gobert? Have you found one person within the realm of your entire world that endorses the move that they made?
Well, endorses, Dan, might be strong, but there are people that understand it. It's a massive roll of the dice to give up so many unprotected first-round picks. But what Rudy Gobert has proven to be in Utah is someone that instantaneously makes you a top 5, top 10 level defense. And if you look at the problems that Minnesota has dealt with over the last couple of years, their defenses have either been bad or they have been mediocre because of smoke and mirrors type of stuff, some gimmicky stuff that Chris Finch, the head coach, has put into their system. You put Gobert into that lineup, and all of a sudden, you're going to get stops. I mean, your perimeter defenders don't look quite as bad because Rudy Gobert is back there cleaning up all their mistakes. The question, if you look beyond the slow start, the question is going to be, when you get into the postseason, is Chris Finch, are the Timberwolves, willing to put a, $36 million man on the bench in the closing minutes of the fourth quarter? Because oftentimes, that's going to be Minnesota's best lineup option. Having Karl Towns at the 5 and putting a bunch of shooters around him in a small lineup. Is Finch going to be willing to do that? Are the Timberwolves going to be cool with that? Is Gobert, who has kind of bristled over the last couple of years at the suggestion that he wasn't a playoff performer, are they going to be willing to pull it off? But short term, like the Timberwolves had 46 wins last year. Even with this start, I think they get above 50 wins this year, and I think they're in the middle of the Western Conference playoff picture. And that, for a team that has had, one lengthy playoff run in its entire franchise history, that's kind of a win.
But did anyone anywhere, did they like the trade?
Anyone.
Understanding and liking it are two different things.
Did anyone you ran into say they would have given up that much for Rudy Gobert?
The most common reaction is Danny Ainge won, because Danny Ainge always wins these deals. I mean, I get hammered all the time for kind of being an Ainge advocate, an Ainge supporter, whatever you want to call it. But he just keeps, whenever he has an asset, he's not going to make a deal unless he's sure he won by a country mile. He did it in the Brooklyn deal when he traded Pierce and Garnett for all those picks. He did it again with Gobert. He probably wound up doing it again with Donovan Mitchell. So whenever Danny Ainge is involved, I just kind of assume that the other side didn't win.
When you stop the presses to completely change the story you have written and instead write the story of who is Joe Mazzulla, what is the answer to that question?
Impressive, at least from a basketball acumen perspective. I mean, look, he's a young guy. He's 34 years old. His previous head coaching experience was 2 years at a Division II college in West Virginia. But if you ask people around the league, they're just really impressed by how smart he is. And that's not just lip service. I mean, when the Celtics, when Brad Stevens took the president of operations job, he interviewed Joe Mazzulla for the head coaching position, and he came away really impressed. When Danny Ainge had a head coaching opening in Utah, he called and interviewed Joe Mazzulla, almost hired Joe Mazzulla. If Will Hardy had not been available, and Will Hardy also on the Celtics staff, if he had not been available, Joe Mazzulla might be the head coach of the Utah Jazz right now. So there's a lot of respect for Joe Mazzulla, the basketball mind out there across the NBA. The question is going to be, does he have it within him to stand up to players in tough situations, to go kind of at Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum when they're being selfish? You remember last year, Ime Udoka, the first couple of months of the season, it was wild. Ime Udoka would effectively take a verbal 2x4 to his players publicly every single night. He would napalm them publicly with criticism if they struggled every single night. But Ime Udoka had the credibility of being a former player, a championship assistant coach, multiple stops at high levels in the NBA in San Antonio, Brooklyn, and in Philadelphia. Joe doesn't have that. So my question as this season goes forward is, when it gets a little bit rocky and players start acting selfishly, maybe guys are trying to make the All-Star team, maybe guys are trying to get all NBA or MVP votes, can Joe Mazzulla stand in that locker room and say, guys, knock it off? Can he get in the face of superstar established players who just a year before had been to the finals?
Guillermo, put it on the poll, please. Can Mazzulla just stand in the locker room and say, guys, knock it off? Only 77, 76, 78 games left, Mannix. You look broken by the basketball season. You're almost there. Take care, buddy.
Thanks, Dan.